The comment came from behind her as she walked past the barracks at Fort Henderson. "Martinez looks like she belongs in a magazine, not a battlefield." The snicker that followed stung more than the Nevada desert wind cutting across the training grounds. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez had heard variations of this her entire military career, but today, something was different. Today, she decided she was done proving herself to people who had already made up their minds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What those soldiers didn't know was that in exactly 72 hours, their too pretty for combat assessment would be put to the ultimate test when forward operating base Viper came under siege. And Elena Martinez would become the only thing standing between 200 American soldiers and complete annihilation. Elena had grown up in Tucson, Arizona, where her father ran a small auto repair shop and her mother worked double shifts at the local hospital. The Martinez family had a tradition of service dating back 3 generations, but Elena was the first woman to enlist. Her decision hadn't come from some grand patriotic calling or childhood dream of military glory. It came from watching her parents struggle to pay bills despite working themselves to exhaustion, and from a deep-seated need to prove that she could handle whatever life threw at her. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood had been her first real taste of the challenge ahead. While other recruits complained about the physical demands, Elena found herself energized by the structure and discipline. She excelled in marksmanship, tactical planning, and leadership exercises. Her drill sergeants took notice, but so did her fellow recruits, and not always in the way she hoped. "Martinez, you're making the rest of us look bad," Private Johnson had joked during weapons training, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely joking. Elena had learned early that excellence as a woman in the military was a double-edged sword. Perform poorly, and you were proof that women didn't belong in combat roles. Perform exceptionally, and you were somehow cheating the system or getting special treatment. After completing her advanced individual training in military intelligence, Elena was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Her commanding officers recognized her analytical skills and tactical acumen, but peer acceptance remained elusive. The comments about her appearance persisted, creating an invisible barrier between her and the respect she had earned through performance alone. The deployment to Afghanistan changed everything. Forward Operating Base Viper sat in a strategically crucial valley in Kandahar province, serving as a logistics hub for coalition forces operating in the southern regions. The base housed nearly 300 personnel, including special operations teams, intelligence analysts, medical staff, and support crews. Elena arrived as part of a joint intelligence unit tasked with coordinating reconnaissance missions and threat assessments for the surrounding area. The landscape around Foe B Viper was unforgiving. Rocky outcroppings provided countless hiding spots for insurgent forces, while the single-access road made supply runs dangerous and predictable. The base itself was well fortified, with concrete barriers, guard towers, and sophisticated surveillance equipment, but its location made it a tempting target for enemy forces looking to disrupt coalition operations. Elena's first month at Viper was spent establishing intelligence networks and building relationships with local sources. Her fluency in Spanish had unexpectedly proven useful when working with interpreters who spoke multiple languages, and her analytical mind quickly grasped the complex tribal dynamics that governed the region. She began producing intelligence reports that accurately predicted insurgent movements and helped prevent several attacks on coalition convoys. Despite her professional success, the social dynamics within the base remained challenging. The comments about her appearance hadn't stopped. If anything, they had intensified. During mess hall conversations, she would catch fragments of discussions about whether she was really qualified, or if she was just checking boxes for military diversity initiatives. Some soldiers went out of their way to be respectful and professional, but others seemed determined to remind her that she didn't belong. The breaking point came during a joint training exercise with the base's quick reaction force. Elena had been assigned to coordinate intelligence support for a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Her analysis of the mock enemy positions and recommended approach routes had been thorough and tactically sound. But when the exercise commenced, several team members ignored her guidance entirely. The exercise ended in failure, with multiple casualties and objectives unmet. During the debrief, Captain Williams, the QRF commander, barely acknowledged Elena's contributions while praising team members whose actions had directly contradicted her recommendations. The message was clear: her expertise was tolerated, but not truly valued. That evening, Elena sat in her quarters reviewing intelligence reports when her roommate, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, returned from her shift in the medical bay. Sarah was one of the few people on base who treated Elena as a colleague rather than an anomaly, and she could immediately sense Elena's frustration. "Rough day with the boys' club?" Sarah asked, settling onto her bunk with a cup of coffee. Elena looked up from her laptop. "I'm starting to think it doesn't matter what I do. I could single-handedly capture Osama bin Laden's ghost, and they'd still find a way to minimize it." "You know what your problem is?" Sarah said with a slight smile. "You're too good at this job, and you make it look easy. That threatens people who want to believe that what they do is so difficult that only a select few can handle it. So what am I supposed to do? Perform worse to make them feel better? Hell, no. You keep being excellent, and eventually, the situation will arise where your excellence is the only thing that matters. When that happens, all this other noise becomes irrelevant." Sarah's words prophetic sooner than either woman could have imagined. 3 days later, Elena was working the night shift in the intelligence center when intercepts began painting a disturbing picture. Multiple insurgent cells were coordinating movements toward Fob Viper's location using communication patterns she had never seen before. The volume of encrypted traffic suggested something far larger than the typical hit-and-run attacks the base had experienced. Elena spent the next 6 hours piecing together fragments of intercepted communications, satellite imagery, and human intelligence reports. What emerged was a comprehensive plan for a coordinated assault on Fob Viper, involving at least 200 insurgent fighters equipped with heavy weapons, explosives, and detailed knowledge of the base's defensive positions. The attack was scheduled for dawn, less than 12 hours away. Elena immediately contacted the base commander, Colonel Harrison, who arrived at the intelligence center within minutes. As she briefed him on her findings, his expression grew increasingly grave. The base's normal complement of defenders was already stretched thin due to ongoing operations, and several key units were away on missions. Reinforcements were available, but they were positioned hours away and couldn't arrive before the attack commenced. "How confident are you in this assessment, Sergeant Martinez?" Colonel Harrison asked. "Sir, I've cross-referenced every piece of intelligence we have. The patterns are consistent across multiple sources. This is happening, and it's bigger than anything we've faced here before." The colonel studied the intelligence displays, his mind clearly racing through options. "What do you recommend?" Elena had been hoping he wouldn't ask that question, because her answer was going to sound impossible. "Sir, we need to evacuate non-essential personnel immediately, but we can't abandon the base entirely. Too much sensitive equipment and intelligence would fall into enemy hands. We need a skeleton crew to maintain security while conducting a fighting withdrawal if necessary." "And who's going to coordinate that kind of operation?" "My S2 is at Bagram for a conference, and my XO is leading a convoy that won't be back until tomorrow afternoon." Elena felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "Sir, I've been studying the base layout and defensive positions since I arrived. I know every choke point, every avenue of approach, and every piece of equipment we can't afford to lose. I can coordinate the evacuation and defensive operations." Colonel Harrison stared at her for a long moment. Elena could practically see the calculations running through his head. Trust the intelligence analyst who had been right about every threat assessment she'd made, or wait for more senior officers who might not arrive in time. "All right, Martinez, this is your show. What do you need?" The next few hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Elena worked with the base's senior NCOs to identify essential personnel who would remain behind, while organizing the evacuation of nearly 200 soldiers and civilian contractors. Medical supplies, sensitive intelligence materials, and critical communications equipment had to be secured or prepared for destruction if necessary. The evacuation convoy departed at 0300 hours, leaving behind a force of 96 soldiers under Elena's coordination. As the taillights of the last vehicle disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Elena felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 3 hours, she would discover whether her intelligence assessment was accurate and whether her hastily assembled defensive plan could withstand what was coming. Standing in the command center, surrounded by maps and radio equipment, Elena Martinez no longer looked like someone who was too pretty for combat. She looked exactly like what she was, a soldier preparing to fight for the lives of everyone who had chosen to trust her. Judgment. The radio crackled to life. "Viper Base, this is Overwatch 1. We have multiple vehicles moving toward your position. Count at least 40 trucks, heavily loaded. 8 of 15 minutes. Elena keyed her microphone. "Copy, Overwatch 1. All stations, this is Viper Actual. Enemy contact is imminent. Execute defensive plan Alpha. Good luck, everyone." As the first explosions echoed across the valley, Elena Martinez discovered that sometimes being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage of all. The first mortar round struck the outer perimeter at 0547 hours, sending concrete and steel fragments screaming across the compound. Elena felt the shock waves through the command center floor as she coordinated defensive positions over the radio network. The insurgent forces had approached from 3 directions simultaneously, exactly as her intelligence analysis had predicted. But the sheer volume of incoming fire exceeded even her worst-case scenarios. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tower 3 report. Elena called into her headset as another explosion rocked the base. "Tower 3 here. We've got approximately 60 fighters advancing from the northeast ridge. They're using the rocky outcroppings for cover, moving in coordinated teams. Heavy weapons include at least 2 RPGs and what looks like a recoilless rifle." Elena marked the positions on her tactical display while simultaneously monitoring reports from the other defensive sectors. The insurgents had clearly studied Phobe Viper's layout extensively. Their initial bombardment had targeted the motor pool, communications array, and main generator, demonstrating intimate knowledge of the base's critical infrastructure. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the senior NCO remaining on base, approached Elena's position. "Martinez, we're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. The guys are asking what the plan is beyond just holding our positions." Elena studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The insurgent force was larger and better coordinated than anticipated, but they were following predictable attack patterns. More importantly, they seemed to believe they were facing the base's full complement of defenders. "Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate a fighting withdrawal from the outer perimeter to the secondary defensive line. Make it look panicked and disorganized. I want them to think we're breaking under pressure." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "You want us to give them ground? They'll advance into better firing positions. That's exactly what I want. Look at these approach routes." Elena pointed to the tactical display. If they advance according to standard assault doctrine, they'll funnel into this natural choke point between buildings. C and D, that's where we stop the retreat and hit them with everything we have. The plan was risky, requiring precise timing and discipline from defenders who were already under intense pressure. Elena knew that one mistake could turn a tactical withdrawal into a genuine rout, but she also recognized that conventional defensive tactics wouldn't work against such overwhelming numbers. Over the next 20 minutes, Elena orchestrated what appeared to be a collapsing defense. Radio chatter was deliberately frantic, with reports of falling back and can't hold this position. Soldiers abandoned their outer positions in apparent disarray, leaving behind equipment and firing positions that the insurgent forces quickly occupied. The deception worked perfectly. Emboldened by their apparent success, the insurgent fighters advanced aggressively toward the base's interior, concentrating their forces exactly where Elena had predicted. When the leading elements reached the kill zone between buildings C and D, she gave the order that would determine the battle's outcome. All stations, execute hammer time. I repeat, execute hammer time. The response was immediate and devastating. Machine gun positions that had been carefully concealed opened fire simultaneously, catching the advancing insurgents in a crossfire from elevated positions. Mortar teams that had relocated during the withdrawal began dropping precision rounds into the concentrated enemy formations. Snipers who had taken new positions during the apparent retreat began systematically eliminating insurgent leaders and heavy weapons operators. The tide of battle shifted within minutes. What had appeared to be a successful assault became a deadly trap, with insurgent fighters caught in open ground under withering fire from positions they hadn't identified. Elena monitored the radio traffic as her carefully coordinated plan unfolded, making real-time adjustments as new intelligence reached the command center. Viper Actual, this is the crossbow team. We've eliminated the recoilless rifle position on the northern ridge. Enemy fighters are beginning to withdraw from that sector. Copy, crossbow. Shadow teams shift fire to support sectors 2 and 3. Don't let them regroup. Elena's tactical display showed the battle's evolution in real time. The insurgent force, which had seemed unstoppable during their initial advance, was now fractured and confused. Their communications had been disrupted by targeted strikes against command elements, and their coordinated assault had devolved into isolated pockets of resistance. But Elena knew the fight wasn't over. Intelligence intercepts had indicated this was more than a simple assault. It was part of a larger operation designed to capture or destroy critical intelligence assets housed at FOB Viper. Even as the immediate attack faltered, she was monitoring communications that suggested a secondary force was moving to surround the base and prevent any evacuation. Rodriguez, I need a casualty report and ammunition status from all positions. Elena called out as she studied satellite feeds showing movement on the surrounding ridgelines. We've got 8 wounded, none critical. Ammunition is at 60% overall, but some positions are running lower. The machine gun teams burned through a lot of ammo during the ambush. Elena nodded, already calculating their options. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but their situation remained precarious. The base's reduced complement of defenders had performed brilliantly, but they couldn't sustain prolonged combat against determined attackers who knew their approximate numbers and positions. New voice crackled over the radio network. Viper Actual, this is Phoenix 6. We're monitoring your situation from an overwatch position. Be advised, we're tracking approximately 40 additional vehicles moving to establish blocking positions on your access road. Looks like they're trying to prevent reinforcement or evacuation. Elena felt her stomach tighten. The insurgents were implementing a classic siege strategy, isolating FOB Viper while preparing for either a prolonged assault or negotiations for surrender. Neither option was acceptable, given the sensitive intelligence materials and equipment that couldn't be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Phoenix 6, what's our timeline for friendly reinforcement? Earliest ETA is 4 hours for ground forces, 6 hours for air support due to weather conditions in the region. You're on your own until then. 4 hours. Elena stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The base's remaining defenders could probably hold their positions against another direct assault, but not against a sustained siege with dwindling ammunition and no resupply capability. Meanwhile, the critical intelligence materials they were protecting included operational plans that could compromise coalition forces throughout the region. The solution, when it came to her, was so audacious that her first instinct was to dismiss it as impossible. But as she studied the tactical situation more carefully, she realized it might be their only viable option. All station commanders report to the command center immediately. We need to discuss our next move. Within minutes, the base's senior NCOs had assembled around Elena's tactical display. These were experienced soldiers who had served in multiple combat deployments, but the situation they faced was unprecedented. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez spoke for the group when he examined Elena's preliminary plan. Martinez, you're talking about abandoning a fortified position to conduct an offensive operation against a numerically superior enemy force. That's not tactical withdrawal, that's suicide. Elena understood their skepticism, but she also knew that conventional thinking wouldn't solve their current predicament. Look at the intelligence picture. They've committed their main force to establishing blocking positions on the access road. That means their assault capability is diminished, but they're preventing our reinforcement and evacuation. If we stay here, we're just waiting for them to decide when and how to finish this. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who commanded the base's remaining mechanized assets, studied the plan more carefully. The concept makes sense tactically, but the execution requirements are extreme. We'd need perfect timing, absolute surprise, and a lot of luck. We'd also need every person on this base to perform flawlessly under conditions none of us have trained for, added Sergeant Martinez from the communications section. One mistake, and we're all dead or captured. Elena met each of their gazes in turn. These soldiers had followed her tactical guidance during the morning's battle, but asking them to support an offensive operation was different. She was requesting that they trust her not just with defensive coordination, but with their lives in a high-risk assault against superior numbers. I know what I'm asking, Elena said quietly. But look at our alternatives. We can hold this base for maybe 6 more hours under siege conditions. Our ammunition will be depleted, our casualties will mount, and eventually, they'll either overrun our positions or force us to surrender. Either outcome means that critical intelligence falls into enemy hands and compromises coalition operations throughout this region. The room fell silent as each soldier considered their options. Elena could see the calculations running through their minds, the risks of action versus the certainty of eventual defeat through inaction. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez was the first to speak. What exactly are you proposing? Elena activated a detailed satellite map showing the terrain surrounding Fob Viper. The insurgent blocking force is positioned here, approximately 3 kilometers from the base, along the main access road. They occupy high ground with excellent fields of fire, but they're also predictably positioned and focused on preventing movement toward the base rather than away from it. She traced routes on the map with her finger. If we can reach this ridgeline undetected, we'll have elevation advantage and the ability to coordinate fires against their blocking positions. More importantly, we can threaten their line of communication back to their main base of operations. Staff Sergeant Thompson studied the proposed route. That's rough terrain, and we'd have to move our remaining vehicles cross-country without being detected, the noise alone. We don't use vehicles for the initial movement, Elena interrupted. We go on foot, carrying only essential equipment and ammunition. Once we're in position, we coordinate a simultaneous assault that eliminates their blocking capability and opens the route for our evacuation convoy. The plan was complex and dangerous, requiring the base's remaining 96 defenders to execute a night movement through hostile territory, establish attack positions without detection, and conduct coordinated strikes against entrenched enemy forces. But as Elena outlined the details, the assembled NCOs began to see how it could work. "Timeline?" Rodriguez asked. "We begin movement at 2,100 hours. That gives us 6 hours to reach attack positions, establish communications, and coordinate with air support that should be available by dawn. The assault commences at first light, synchronized with the arrival of our reinforcement convoy." Elena could see the shift in the room's atmosphere as her soldiers moved from skepticism to tactical analysis. These were professionals who understood both the risks and the potential rewards of bold action. More importantly, they were beginning to believe that Elena Martinez wasn't just another analyst trying to play soldier. The final decision came from an unexpected source. Private First Class Jackson, the youngest soldier in the room, spoke up from his position near the communication equipment. "Sergeant Martinez, I've been monitoring enemy communications during this briefing. They're discussing plans to assault the base again at dawn, coordinated with psychological operations designed to force our surrender. They're confident we can't escape and convinced we won't risk offensive action." Elena smiled grimly. "Then we're about to prove them wrong on both counts. Gentlemen, we have 6 hours to prepare for the most important mission any of us has ever undertaken. Let's get to work." As the meeting dispersed and soldiers began preparing for the night operation, Elena remained in the command center, fine-tuning the plan that would either save Fob Viper or result in the destruction of everyone who had trusted her leadership. Outside, the sun was setting over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across a battlefield where a young intelligence analyst was about to discover whether tactical brilliance could overcome impossible odds. At 2047 hours, Elena Martinez stood at the edge of Fob Viper's perimeter, her face blackened, with camouflage paint and her equipment stripped down to absolute essentials. Behind her, 95 other soldiers waited in the darkness, each carrying enough ammunition and supplies for a 12-hour operation that would either break the siege or end with their capture or death. The night movement began in complete silence. Elena had divided the force into 4 teams, each taking a different route through the mountainous terrain toward their objective. The teams would maintain radio silence until reaching predetermined checkpoints, relying on precise timing and navigation to coordinate their approach to the insurgent blocking positions. Elena led the primary assault team, consisting of 24 soldiers, including the base's most experienced marksmen and demolition specialists. Her route was the most direct but also the most dangerous, requiring passage through a narrow valley that offered concealment but limited escape routes if they were discovered. The Afghan terrain was unforgiving in daylight and treacherous in darkness. Rocky outcroppings and loose scree made silent movement nearly impossible, while the thin mountain air left everyone breathing heavily despite their conditioning. Elena had calculated the movement would take 4 hours, but the reality of navigating unfamiliar ground in complete darkness was proving more challenging than anticipated. 2 hours into the movement, Elena's team encountered their first major obstacle. A dried riverbed that had appeared passable on satellite imagery was revealed to be a 15-foot deep gorge with steep, unstable sides. The original route was impossible, requiring an immediate decision that could compromise the entire operations. Timing. Elena studied the terrain through night vision equipment, her mind racing through alternatives. The team could backtrack and find an alternate route, but that would delay their arrival by at least an hour. They could attempt to rappel into the gorge and climb out the other side, but the noise and time required would expose them to detection. Or they could continue along the gorge's edge until finding a crossing point, Risking separation from the other teams, she made the decision that defined her leadership style throughout the operation. Calculated risk in service of the missions. Success. We follow the gorge northeast for 1 kilometer, she whispered to her team leaders. Intelligence indicates a natural bridge formation in that direction. We cross there and adjust our approach accordingly. The decision proved correct. 40 minutes later, Elena's team discovered a rock fall that had created a natural bridge across the gorge. The crossing was dangerous, requiring each soldier to traverse 20 feet of unstable rocks in complete darkness, but it was passable, and allowed them to maintain operational security. By 0230 hours, all 4 teams had reached their preliminary positions on the ridgeline overlooking the insurgent blocking force. Elena's intelligence assessment had been accurate. Approximately 40 vehicles and 200 fighters were positioned in a defensive configuration designed to control the access road while maintaining communication with their main base. What the intelligence hadn't revealed was the sophistication of their defensive positions. The insurgents had constructed reinforced fighting positions, established interlocking fields of fire, and positioned heavy weapons to engage threats from multiple directions. This wasn't a hastily established roadblock. It was a well-planned defensive complex that would require coordinated precision to overcome. Elena established her command position on a rocky outcropping that provided observation of the entire enemy complex while maintaining communication with her dispersed teams. Through high-powered optics, she could see sentries moving between positions, the glow of cigarettes in fighting holes, and the thermal signatures of vehicle engines being periodically started to prevent freezing in the cold mountain air. The assault plan required perfect synchronization. Team Alpha, led by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, would establish overwatch positions and engage enemy sentries and heavy weapons operators at the operation's commencement. Team Bravo, under Staff Sergeant Thompson, would assault the motor pool and destroy the insurgents' vehicles to prevent escape or reinforcement. Team Charlie would secure the communication equipment to prevent calls for assistance, while Elena's Team Delta would eliminate the command structure and secure any intelligence. Materials. At 0445 hours, Elena received confirmation that the relief convoy was moving toward their position and would arrive within 2 hours. Air support remained problematic due to weather conditions, but close air support aircraft were standing by if the tactical situation deteriorated. All teams final equipment check, Elena whispered into her radio. Remember, we have one chance to get this right. Speed, violence of action, and precise execution. Any questions? The responses came back negative from all teams. Elena could hear the tension in her soldiers' voices, but also the determination that had characterized their performance throughout the siege. These weren't the same people who had questioned her qualifications months earlier. They were professionals who had learned to trust her tactical judgment under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. At exactly 0500 hours, Elena gave the order that would determine whether her audacious plan succeeded or failed catastrophically. Execute, execute. The assault began with precisely aimed sniper fire that eliminated key sentries simultaneously across the insurgent complex. Before the enemy could react to the initial casualties, Team Alpha's machine gunners opened fire on predetermined targets, suppressing the heavy weapons positions, while creating chaos and confusion among the defending forces. Team Bravo's assault on the motor pool was devastating. Demolitions charges detonated in sequence, destroying a dozen vehicles in the first 30 seconds and creating massive fires that illuminated the entire battlefield. The psychological effect was immediate. Insurgent fighters who had been confident in their defensive positions suddenly found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction by forces they couldn't see or accurately engage. Elena's Team Delta moved through the chaos with surgical precision. Her intelligence training had taught her to identify command structures and critical communication nodes, allowing her team to systematically eliminate the insurgents' ability to coordinate their response. Within 10 minutes of the assault's commencement, the enemy force had been reduced from an organized offensive unit to scattered groups of fighters operating independently. But the operation's most critical moment came when Elena discovered something her intelligence preparation hadn't anticipated. A high-value target who changed everything about their mission's strategic importance. In the command bunker that Team Delta had assaulted, Elena found not just local insurgent leaders but a senior foreign operative whose capture would provide intelligence on enemy operations throughout the region. More importantly, the documents and electronic equipment in the bunker contained information about planned attacks against multiple coalition bases, including detailed intelligence about FOB Viper's normal operational patterns. This changes our extraction timeline, Elena realized as she examined the materials. The intelligence value was enormous, but it also meant they were now carrying materials that the enemy would pursue aggressively. Their successful assault had been the easy part. Getting this intelligence back to coalition forces would require fighting their way through reinforcements that were certainly en route. As if summoned by her thoughts, the radio crackled with reports from the Overwatch teams. Viper Actual. This is Alpha Team. We're observing multiple vehicle convoys moving toward our position from the south and east. Estimated strength is 60 to 80 vehicles. ETA approximately 20 minutes. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she processed this information. The assault had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but they were now facing a new tactical problem: extraction under pressure from superior forces who knew their approximate location and had every incentive to prevent their escape. All teams consolidate on the primary extraction point. We're moving in 5 minutes with valuable cargo that cannot be compromised. The withdrawal from the assault position required the same precision that had characterized the attack, but now under time pressure and with enemy reinforcements approaching, Elena's teams moved through the terrain using techniques that balanced speed with operational security, carrying captured materials and prisoners while maintaining defensive capabilities. The natural choke points that had aided their approach now became potential death traps during withdrawal. Elena constantly monitored radio traffic while navigating the mountain paths, coordinating with air assets that were finally becoming available and calculating intersection points with their relief convoy. 20 minutes into the withdrawal, the pursuing insurgent forces made contact with Elena's rear guard. Team Alpha, which had transitioned to Overwatch duties during the extraction, engaged the leading elements of the pursuit force from concealed positions along the ridgeline. Contact rear. Alpha Team is engaging approximately 30 dismounted fighters. We're slowing them down, but they're determined to close the distance. Elena realized that conventional withdrawal tactics wouldn't work against such aggressive pursuit. The enemy knew the strategic value of what had been captured and were willing to accept heavy casualties to prevent its extraction. She needed to create separation between her force and their pursuers, using the terrain and her team's tactical advantages. Alpha Team, continue engagement from current positions for 5 more minutes, then bound back to checkpoint 3. Bravo Team, establish ambush positions at the narrow passage near checkpoint 2. We're going to channel their pursuit into a kill zone. The running battle that followed tested every aspect of Elena's tactical training and her soldiers' combat experience. Her teams conducted a series of coordinated withdrawals, using ambush tactics to inflict casualties on their pursuers while maintaining the pace necessary to reach the extraction point before being overwhelmed. The key moment came when Elena's force reached the final ridgeline before their rendezvous with the relief convoy. Below them, she could see the convoy's vehicles moving up the access road, but behind them, the pursuing insurgent force had grown to over 100 fighters who showed no signs of giving up their chase. This is where we make our stand, Elena. announced to her team leaders. "We hold this position until the convoy reaches us, then we extract under their covering fire. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We've come too far to lose anyone now." The final engagement lasted 18 minutes and demonstrated the tactical evolution that Elena's leadership had created within her unit. Her soldiers operated with the precision of a special operations team, coordinating fires and movement with an efficiency that maximized their combat effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy action. When the relief convoy's heavy weapons joined the engagement, the pursuing insurgent force finally began to withdraw. Elena watched through her optics as enemy fighters disappeared into the terrain they had emerged from, leaving behind casualties and abandoned equipment that testified to the fierce resistance they had encountered. All teams, begin movement to extraction vehicles. Maintain security until we're clear of the area. As Elena's soldiers loaded into the armored vehicles of the relief convoy, she reflected on the 12-hour period that had transformed her from an underestimated intelligence analyst into a combat leader, whose tactical decisions had saved nearly 100 American lives while capturing intelligence materials that would prevent future attacks against coalition forces. The convoy began its movement back toward friendly territory, carrying not just survivors of the siege of Fogue Viper, but proof that tactical excellence could overcome numerical disadvantage when combined with audacious planning and precise execution. Elena Martinez had entered combat as someone who was supposedly too pretty for such responsibilities. She was leaving it as a soldier whose tactical brilliance had achieved what many experienced officers would have considered impossible. But the full impact of her achievement wouldn't become apparent until intelligence analysts began processing the materials she had captured and military leadership recognized the strategic implications of her tactical success. The convoy reached Camp Phoenix at 13:47 hours, 31 hours after the siege of Fogue Viper had begun. Elena Martinez stepped down from the lead vehicle carrying a waterproof case containing intelligence materials that would reshape coalition understanding of insurgent operations throughout the region. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood from a grazing wound she'd sustained during the final firefight. But her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had accomplished something extraordinary. Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins was waiting at the convoy's arrival point, having flown in from Kabul specifically to debrief the Fogue Viper survivors. Elena had never met the general before, but she recognized her by reputation, one of the Army's most respected intelligence officers and a pioneer for women in combat roles. What Elena didn't expect was the general's first words upon their introduction. "Sergeant Martinez, I've been receiving updates on your tactical decisions for the past 18 hours. Before we begin any formal debriefing, I want to understand how an intelligence analyst with no prior combat command experience managed to coordinate a defensive operation, plan a complex assault, and execute a fighting withdrawal that professional military educators will be studying for decades." Elena considered her response carefully. The question wasn't hostile, but it carried implications about military hierarchy and traditional command structures that she needed to address thoughtfully. "Ma'am, I didn't do any of this alone. I had 95 soldiers who performed exceptionally under extreme circumstances. My role was providing analysis and coordination based on intelligence patterns I recognized. The tactical execution was a team effort by professionals who deserved better leadership than circumstances initially provided." General Hawkins studied Elena's response with obvious interest. "That's a diplomatic answer, Sergeant, but it doesn't explain how you identified attack patterns that our regional intelligence fusion cell missed, or how you coordinated a multi-phase operation with precision that many battalion commanders couldn't achieve." The debriefing that followed lasted 6 hours and involved intelligence specialists, tactical analysts, and senior commanders from multiple units. Elena walked them through her analysis methodology, explained her tactical reasoning, and detailed the decision-making process that had guided each phase of the operation. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of analytical thinking combined with tactical innovation that challenged conventional assumptions about combat leadership. Colonel Harrison, who had commanded Phobe Viper before the siege, provided testimony that transformed Elena's role from participant to central figure in the operation's success. General Hawkins, I need to be clear about what happened at Viper. Sergeant Martinez didn't just provide good intelligence analysis. She identified a threat that our normal systems had missed, developed a defense plan that saved the base, and then conceived an offensive operation that achieved objectives I wouldn't have thought possible with available resources. This wasn't luck or accident. This was tactical brilliance under pressure. But the real significance of Elena's achievement only became apparent when intelligence analysts began processing the materials her team had captured during the assault on the blocking force. The documents and electronic devices contained detailed plans for coordinated attacks against 7 coalition bases, including timing, target analysis, and insider information that suggested intelligence leaks within coalition support structures. Major Sarah Chun, the intelligence fusion cell chief, briefed the senior leadership on the strategic implications during the second day of debriefings. The materials Sergeant Martinez's team captured have allowed us to prevent attacks that would have resulted in hundreds of coalition casualties and potentially compromise our entire operational capability in this region. More importantly, we've identified security vulnerabilities that were being systematically exploited by enemy intelligence operations. Elena found herself in the surreal position of listening to senior officers discuss the strategic impact of her tactical decisions. The operation that had begun as a desperate attempt to save Phobe Viper had evolved into a counterintelligence breakthrough that would influence coalition strategy throughout Afghanistan. The personal recognition came in forms Elena had never anticipated. General Hawkins recommended her for immediate promotion to staff sergeant and assignment to the Coalition Intelligence Fusion Cell as a senior analyst. More significantly, she was selected to attend the Army's Advanced Military Studies program, a career pathway typically reserved for officers with extensive command experience. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the debriefing concluded, Elena was approached by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, who had served as her senior NCO throughout the Phobe Viper operation. Martinez, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me since we got back. When this whole thing started, I had doubts about following tactical guidance from someone without infantry experience. I thought your intelligence background was valuable, but I wasn't sure you understood the realities of ground combat. Elena waited for him to continue, uncertain where the conversation was heading. I was wrong. Not just about your tactical understanding, but about what makes someone qualified for combat leadership. You demonstrated something that can't be taught in any school, the ability to see the complete picture under pressure and make decisions that maximize everyone's chance of survival while accomplishing the mission. That's not about gender or appearance or traditional career paths. That's about character and competence. Rodriguez's words carried special weight because they came from someone whose respect had to be earned through performance rather than granted through rank or position. Elena realized that her experience at Phobe Viper had changed not just her own career trajectory, but the perceptions of soldiers who had witnessed her leadership firsthand. The transformation in attitudes became evident during Elena's final weeks. At Camp Phoenix before transferring to her new assignment, soldiers who had never spoken to her before sought her out for tactical discussions. Officers who had previously dismissed her input began requesting her analysis on operational planning. The woman who had been considered too pretty for combat was now recognized as someone whose tactical insights were genuinely valuable. Captain Williams, the Quick Reaction Force commander who had ignored Elena's recommendations during the pre-siege training exercise, approached her during her farewell gathering, Sergeant Martinez, I owe you an apology that's long overdue. My failure to value your tactical input during that training exercise wasn't based on objective assessment of your capabilities. It was based on assumptions that had nothing to do with your professional qualifications. The operation at Phobe Viper demonstrated that tactical excellence isn't determined by traditional demographics or career paths. Elena accepted the apology graciously, but she also recognized that individual attitude changes weren't sufficient to address systemic challenges facing women in combat roles. Her experience had been exceptional in many ways, but it had also highlighted persistent problems with how military culture evaluated competence and leadership potential. The broader implications of Elena's achievement became apparent when she received orders for her next assignment. The Army's senior leadership had decided to use her experience as a case study for expanding combat leadership opportunities for personnel from non-traditional backgrounds. She would be working with military education institutions to develop training programs that emphasized analytical thinking and tactical innovation alongside conventional combat skills. Elena's final day at Camp Phoenix provided an opportunity to reflect on the events that had transformed her military career. She stood at the same location where she had arrived 37 days earlier as an intelligence analyst struggling for professional recognition. Now she was departing as someone whose tactical decisions had saved lives and prevented strategic losses for coalition forces. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, her former roommate, who had become a close friend during their deployment, joined Elena for a final conversation before her departure. Do you think this changes anything for other women in combat roles? Sarah asked. Elena considered the question carefully. I think it demonstrates that tactical excellence can come from unexpected sources and that the military benefits when it evaluates people based on performance rather than preconceptions. Whether that translates into broader changes depends on whether leadership is willing to challenge traditional assumptions about combat effectiveness. And personally, how do you feel about everything that's happened? Elena smiled, remembering the woman who had walked past those barracks at Fort Henderson, listening to comments about being too pretty for combat. I feel like I discovered something about myself that I never would have found without extreme circumstances forcing the discovery. I'm good at this job not despite being different from traditional combat leaders, but because different perspectives can generate tactical solutions that conventional thinking might miss. The flight to her new assignment at Fort Leavenworth gave Elena time to process the magnitude of her experience. She had entered the deployment as someone fighting for basic professional respect and was leaving it as someone whose tactical innovations would influence military education and operational doctrine. But perhaps the most significant change was personal. Elena Martinez no longer felt the need to prove that she belonged in military service. Her experience at Phobe Viper had demonstrated that competence and character were more important than conforming to traditional expectations about combat leadership. 3 months later, Elena received a letter that provided the perfect conclusion to her Phobe Viper experience. It came from Private First Class Jackson, the youngest soldier who had participated in the operation. Sergeant Martinez, I wanted you to know that your leadership during the siege changed how I think about military service and what makes someone qualified for responsibility. I've been accepted for officer candidate school, and when people ask me what inspired that decision, I tell them about an intelligence analyst who taught me that tactical excellence comes from thinking clearly under pressure and making decisions based on mission requirements rather than personal concerns. I hope someday I can demonstrate the same kind of leadership you showed us at Phobe Viper. Elena folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer next to her promotion orders and commendation citations. But the real measure of her achievement wasn't contained in official documents or formal recognition. It was reflected in the knowledge that when circumstances had demanded extraordinary performance, she had discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed and had used them to save lives. And Accomplish critical missions. The woman who had once been dismissed as too pretty for combat had become living proof that tactical brilliance recognizes no demographic boundaries, and that the military's greatest strength lies in recognizing and developing excellence wherever it emerges. Elena Martinez had found her place in military service, not by conforming to existing expectations, but by demonstrating that those expectations were unnecessarily limited. Her story would become required reading at military academies and professional development courses, ensuring that future generations of soldiers would understand that combat effectiveness is determined by character, competence, and tactical thinking, rather than traditional assumptions about who belongs on the battlefield. The siege of FOB Viper had lasted 31 hours. Its impact on military culture would endure for decades. 18 months after Viper, Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez stood before a lecture hall at the Command and General Staff College, facing an audience of mid-level officers from across the Army's combat arms branches. Her assignment to develop new tactical doctrine had evolved into something unprecedented, creating training programs that challenged fundamental assumptions about combat leadership and decision-making under extreme pressure. The PowerPoint presentation behind her displayed satellite imagery of FOB Viper, but Elena knew that maps and photographs couldn't convey the real lessons her audience needed to understand. The officers in front of her represented the Army's future leadership, and many carried the same preconceptions about combat effectiveness that had nearly prevented her own recognition as a tactical thinker. The conventional wisdom suggests that combat leadership emerges from traditional infantry experience and established command hierarchies. Elena began studying the faces of majors and lieutenant colonels who would soon command battalions and brigades. The siege of FOB Viper demonstrated that tactical innovation often comes from perspectives that don't fit conventional patterns. Major Robert Harrison, son of the colonel who had commanded FOB Viper, raised his hand. Elena had been expecting this question since his enrollment in the course. Sergeant Martinez, with respect, doesn't your experience represent an exceptional circumstance rather than a model for standard operations? Most intelligence analysts aren't going to face situations requiring tactical command decisions. Elena had heard variations of this question dozens of times during her speaking engagements at military installations across the country. It reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what her experience actually demonstrated. Major Harrison, you're correct that most intelligence analysts won't command defensive operations or plan offensive assaults. But every officer in this room will face situations where conventional solutions are inadequate and creative thinking becomes the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The specific circumstances at FOB Viper were unique, but the analytical approach and decision-making methodology are applicable to any tactical scenario. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed a timeline of decisions made during the siege. Let's examine the analytical process rather than the specific military occupational specialty of the person applying it. Over the next 2 hours, Elena walked her audience through each critical decision point, explaining not what she had done, but how she had approached problems that had no obvious solutions. She demonstrated analytical frameworks for processing incomplete information under time pressure, methodologies for evaluating risk against potential outcomes, and techniques for maintaining tactical flexibility when original plans proved inadequate. Response from her audience revealed the complexity of changing institutional culture within the military. Some officers engaged enthusiastically with concepts that challenged traditional tactical thinking, while others remained skeptical of approaches that deviated from established doctrine. Lieutenant Colonel Janet Stevens, a battalion commander preparing for deployment to Syria, stayed after the lecture to continue the discussion. Sergeant Martinez, I've been following your work since the initial reports from Afghanistan. My concern isn't with your tactical competence, that's been proven beyond question. My concern is whether the Army can systematically develop the kind of analytical thinking you demonstrated, or whether it requires exceptional circumstances to emerge. Elena appreciated the thoughtfulness of the question, which addressed implementation challenges rather than questioning the validity of her approach. Colonel Stevens, that's exactly why I've been working with the Training and Doctrine Command to develop assessment tools and educational programs. We're identifying cognitive patterns that correlate with successful decision-making under extreme pressure, regardless of the officer's branch or prior experience. Elena's work at Fort Leavenworth had expanded far beyond her original assignment. The Army's senior leadership had recognized that her tactical innovations represented more than individual excellence. They suggested possibilities for developing institutional capabilities that could enhance overall combat effectiveness. The research component of her assignment involved collaborating with military psychologists and systems analysts to understand why her analytical approach had proven so effective. What they discovered challenged assumptions about military talent development that had persisted for decades. Dr. Margaret Foster, the lead researcher on the project, briefed Elena on their preliminary findings during one of their weekly coordination meetings. The cognitive assessments we've conducted with officers who attended your training programs show measurable improvements in tactical problem-solving capabilities, but only when they're encouraged to abandon rigid adherence to doctrinal solutions. The key factor appears to be intellectual flexibility combined with disciplined analytical methodology, which suggests that tactical innovation can be taught systematically rather than just emerging randomly in exceptional individuals. Elena observed. Exactly. But it also suggests that current military education systems may be inadvertently suppressing the kind of creative thinking that produced your success at Phobe Viper. Elena's research was producing recommendations for fundamental changes in officer education, but implementation faced resistance from institutional elements that preferred traditional approaches to military training. Her position as an enlisted soldier, proposing changes to officer development programs, created additional challenges that had nothing to do with the validity of her ideas. The breakthrough came when General Hawkins, now commanding the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, decided to implement Elena's recommendations as a pilot program for newly commissioned officers. The experimental curriculum would emphasize analytical thinking and tactical flexibility, alongside conventional military skills. Martinez, I'm assigning you to lead the development and implementation of this program, General Hawkins announced during a planning conference at Fort Monroe. You'll have the resources and authority necessary to create educational experiences that develop the kind of tactical thinking you demonstrated in Afghanistan. Elena realized she was being offered an opportunity to influence military education in ways that could affect thousands of future officers. But she also understood the risks involved. If the program failed to produce measurable improvements in tactical competence, it would be seen as evidence that her Phobe Viper success had been an anomaly rather than a replicable methodology. Pilot program launched 6 months later with 200 newly commissioned second lieutenants from various combat arms branches. Elena designed scenarios that required analytical thinking under pressure, collaborative problem-solving with incomplete information, and tactical innovation when conventional approaches proved inadequate. The training environment she created deliberately challenged traditional military hierarchies and decision-making processes. Junior officers were encouraged to question senior officers' assumptions, propose alternative solutions to tactical problems, and defend their recommendations based on analytical merit rather than rank or experience. Lieutenant Amanda Foster, a recent West Point graduate assigned to the pilot program, captured the program's impact in her evaluation report. The training methodology forced me to examine my assumptions about tactical decision-making and consider approaches that wouldn't have occurred to me through conventional military education. More importantly, it demonstrated that effective tactical thinking requires intellectual courage alongside physical courage. But the program's most significant validation came during an unscheduled real-world test. 3 months into the pilot program, a terrorist attack at a military training facility required immediate tactical response from personnel who happened to be in the area. 5 officers from Elena's program were among the first responders, and their actions during the crisis demonstrated the practical value of their enhanced analytical training. Second Lieutenant Marcus Johnson, who had participated in Elena's program, coordinated the initial response that prevented significant casualties and contained the threat until specialized units arrived. His after-action report credited his training with providing frameworks for rapid assessment and decision-making under extreme stress. The analytical methodology we learned allowed me to process information quickly and identify tactical options that weren't immediately obvious. More importantly, it gave me confidence to make decisions based on situational analysis rather than just following predetermined procedures. The success of the pilot program led to Elena's promotion to sergeant, first class, and assignment as the senior enlisted advisor for tactical education innovation. Her role expanded to include developing assessment tools for identifying officers with exceptional analytical potential and creating advanced programs for senior military leaders. But Elena's most important contribution came through her influence on individual officers who would carry her methodologies into command positions throughout the Army. The cognitive framework she had developed were being applied to tactical situations across multiple theaters of operation, producing measurable improvements in mission success rates and casualty reduction. Colonel Sarah Chun, Elena's former roommate who had been promoted and assigned to command a forward deployed unit, provided regular updates on how Elena's training influenced real-world operations. The analytical techniques you taught us have become standard operating procedure for my battalion. We've successfully completed several complex operations that would have been extremely challenging using conventional tactical approaches. Your methodology isn't just academic theory. It's producing concrete results in combat environments. Elena's personal journey had evolved in ways she had never anticipated when she first enlisted. The young woman who had struggled for basic professional recognition had become someone whose intellectual contributions were reshaping military doctrine and educational systems. The transformation was symbolized by an invitation Elena received to address the annual gathering of the Association of the United States Army, where she would speak to an audience of senior military leaders, defense industry executives, and policy makers about the future of tactical innovation. Standing at the podium in Washington, D.C., Elena reflected on the path that had brought her from questioning her place in military service to helping define its future direction. The audience represented the institutional power structure that had initially been skeptical of her contributions, but they were now seeking her insights on developing the next generation of military leaders. The siege of Phobe Viper taught me that tactical excellence isn't determined by traditional qualifications or conventional career paths. Elena told the audience, it emerges when analytical thinking combines with moral courage to produce solutions that serve the mission and protect the people executing it. The military's greatest strength lies not in maintaining traditional approaches, but in recognizing and developing innovative thinking wherever it emerges. Elena's speech concluded with a challenge that reflected her evolution from someone seeking acceptance to someone demanding institutional change. The question facing military leadership isn't whether my experience at Phobe Viper was exceptional. The question is whether we're creating systems that develop exceptional tactical thinking systematically, or whether we're continuing to rely on chance encounters between extraordinary circumstances and individuals who happen to possess the analytical capabilities needed to respond effectively. As Elena left the podium to sustained applause, she carried with her the knowledge that her influence on military culture would extend far beyond her own career. The analytical methodologies she had developed were being integrated into training programs, educational curricula, and operational doctrine that would influence military effectiveness for decades. The woman who had once been dismissed as too pretty for combat had become the architect of educational systems designed to ensure that future military leaders would be evaluated based on intellectual capability and tactical competence, rather than demographic assumptions or traditional CAREER patterns. Elena Martinez had transformed not just her own military career, but the institutional frameworks that would determine how the Army identified, developed, and employed tactical excellence in an increasingly complex operational environment. 5 years after the siege of FOB Viper, Master Sergeant Elena Martinez received a phone call that would define the final chapter of her extraordinary military career. General Patricia Hawkins, now the Army Chief of Staff, was requesting Elena's immediate deployment to oversee a crisis situation that threatened to destabilize coalition operations across 3 countries. The call came while Elena was conducting a tactical innovation seminar at the Pentagon, teaching senior defense officials about cognitive frameworks for rapid decision-making. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being pulled from a classroom where she taught others to think tactically, to apply those same principles in a real-world crisis that conventional leadership approaches had failed to resolve. Martinez, we have a situation in Eastern Europe that requires your specific expertise, General Hawkins explained during their secure video conference. 3 separate incidents involving coalition forces have occurred within the past 72 hours, and our traditional command structures are struggling to develop coordinated responses. I need someone who can see patterns that others are missing and coordinate solutions across multiple theaters simultaneously. The deployment briefing revealed a complex scenario that tested every analytical framework Elena had developed since FOB Viper. Intelligence indicated that a sophisticated adversary was conducting coordinated operations designed to test coalition response capabilities while exploiting weaknesses in interagency coordination, and joint tactical planning. Unlike the siege of FOB Viper, where Elena had faced a localized threat with clearly defined parameters, this situation involved multiple countries, competing national interests, and political considerations that complicated purely military solutions. The tactical excellence that had saved lives in Afghanistan would need to evolve into strategic thinking that could prevent a regional conflict. Elena's first stop was the Combined Joint Operations Center in Stuttgart, Germany, where she found a command structure paralyzed by competing priorities and organizational boundaries that prevented effective coordination. Each nation's military representatives were focused on protecting their own forces and interests, while the overarching threat continued to evolve faster than traditional consensus-building processes could address. Colonel Michael Thompson, the American deputy commander, briefed Elena on the challenges they were facing. We're dealing with simultaneous incidents in Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states that appear coordinated, but are occurring in different command jurisdictions with different rules of engagement. Each national command wants to respond independently, but that's exactly what the adversary seems to be trying to provoke. Elena studied the intelligence displays showing the geographic and temporal patterns of the incidents. Her analytical mind immediately began identifying connections that suggested a sophisticated understanding of coalition decision-making processes and deliberate exploitation of institutional weaknesses. Colonel Thompson, I need access to all intelligence reporting from the past 90 days, not just the materials related to these specific incidents. I also need direct communication channels with intelligence analysts from each affected nation. Over the next 18 hours, Elena applied the same analytical methodology that had served her at FOB Viper, but on a scale and complexity that dwarfed her previous experience. The pattern that emerged revealed an adversary strategy designed to create multiple simultaneous crises that would overwhelm traditional command and control systems while exposing coalition vulnerabilities. But Elena also identified something that conventional intelligence analysis had missed. The adversary operations contained deliberate inefficiencies that suggested they were primarily intelligence-gathering efforts rather than preparations for major conflict. The real objective appeared to be studying coalition response patterns to inform future operations. Elena's assessment reached General Hawkins within 6 hours of her arrival in Stuttgart, accompanied by recommendations that challenged fundamental assumptions about the crisis they were facing. General, we're not dealing with preparation for conventional conflict. We're facing a systematic intelligence operation designed to map our decision-making processes and identify exploitable weaknesses in coalition coordination. The appropriate response isn't military escalation. It's strategic deception that provides false information about our actual capabilities while demonstrating coordination that doesn't reveal our real operational methods. The recommendation required convincing multiple national commands to implement coordinated deception operations while maintaining operational security across organizations that had limited experience working together. Elena found herself in the unprecedented position of briefing senior officers from 6 different countries on tactics that had never been attempted at such scale. The implementation of Elena's strategy required her to travel between 3 countries over the following week, coordinating with intelligence services, military commands, and political leadership to ensure synchronized execution of complex deception operations. Her role evolved from tactical analyst to strategic coordinator, managing information flows and decision timelines across multiple time zones and languages. The success of the operation became apparent when adversary intelligence activities suddenly shifted focus, indicating that the deception efforts had provided misleading information about coalition capabilities and coordination mechanisms. More importantly, the coalition forces had demonstrated an ability to coordinate sophisticated responses without revealing actual operational methods. Elena's performance during the crisis led to her selection for the Army's most prestigious assignment, serving as the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The position would make her the highest-ranking enlisted soldier in the American military and place her at the center of national defense decision-making. But before accepting the assignment, Elena requested a final deployment that would complete the circle of her military career. She wanted to return to Afghanistan, where American forces were conducting the final phases of withdrawal operations, to ensure that the tactical innovations developed since Phobe Viper were being properly implemented by the soldiers who would face future challenges. The Afghanistan deployment brought Elena full circle in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself working with young soldiers who had studied her tactical methodologies in military schools, but had never applied them in real-world operations. More significantly, she encountered situations where the institutional changes she had influenced were producing measurable improvements in operational effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, daughter of Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, who had served with Elena at Phobe Viper, commanded one of the units Elena observed during the withdrawal operations. Master Sergeant Martinez, my father has told me stories about your leadership at Phobe Viper since I was in high school. What he emphasized wasn't the specific tactics you used, but the analytical approach that allowed you to see solutions that others missed. That methodology has become standard training for officers in my unit. Elena watched Rodriguez coordinate complex logistics operations using analytical frameworks that had evolved from her Phobe Viper experience. The young officer demonstrated intellectual flexibility and tactical innovation that represented the institutionalization of approaches that had once been considered exceptional. The final validation of Elena's career came during her last week in Afghanistan, when intelligence reports indicated a potential threat to the withdrawal operations that required immediate tactical response. The young officers and NCOs she had been observing applied her analytical methodologies to identify the threat's nature and develop Countermeasures that successfully prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on departing coalition forces. Elena realized she was witnessing the ultimate success of her efforts to change military culture. Soldiers who had never met her were successfully applying cognitive frameworks she had developed, producing tactical excellence that saved lives and accomplished critical missions. The ceremony marking Elena's promotion to command Sergeant Major and assignment as senior enlisted advisor to the chairman took place at the Pentagon, with an audience that included many of the officers whose careers had been influenced by her tactical innovations. General Hawkins presented the promotion personally, acknowledging not just Elena's individual achievements, but her impact on institutional military effectiveness. Command Sergeant Major Martinez represents the evolution of military leadership for the 21st century, General Hawkins told the assembled audience. Her career demonstrates that tactical excellence emerges from analytical thinking, moral courage, and intellectual flexibility rather than traditional demographic characteristics or conventional career patterns. Elena's acceptance speech reflected on the journey that had brought her from a young soldier struggling for professional recognition to the highest enlisted position in the American military. The siege of Phoebe Viper taught me that military effectiveness isn't determined by conforming to traditional expectations, but by developing the intellectual courage to question assumptions and the analytical capability to develop innovative solutions. The military's greatest strength lies in recognizing that tactical excellence can emerge from any soldier who possesses the dedication to think clearly under pressure and the character to make decisions based on mission requirements rather than personal considerations. Elena's new role placed her at the center of strategic decision-making that would influence American military operations worldwide. But her most important contribution continued to be the educational and cultural changes that were producing new generation of military leaders who evaluated tactical problems through analytical frameworks she had pioneered. The institutional transformation Elena had initiated was reflected in military academies, where her tactical methodologies were taught as standard curriculum, in officer education programs that emphasized intellectual flexibility alongside traditional military skills, and in operational units where analytical thinking had become integral to tactical planning. Command Sergeant Major Elena Martinez's office in the Pentagon displayed a single photograph from her military career, the moment she had stood in the command center at Phoebe Viper, coordinating the defense that had saved the base and launched her extraordinary journey through military leadership. The woman in that photograph had been fighting for basic professional recognition while facing comments about being too pretty for combat. The woman who now served as the senior enlisted advisor to the nation's highest military leadership had transformed not just her own career, but the institutional frameworks that determined how the military identified, developed, and employed tactical excellence. Elena's story had become required reading at military educational institutions worldwide, ensuring that future generations of soldiers would understand that combat effectiveness recognizes no demographic boundaries, and that the military's greatest victories often come from perspectives that challenge conventional thinking. The final chapter of Elena Martinez's military career was still being written, but her legacy was already secure. She had proven that tactical brilliance could emerge from unexpected sources and had created systems that would continue developing exceptional military leaders long after her own service concluded. The siege of Phoebe Viper had lasted 31 hours and had transformed one young soldier's career. The institutional changes that followed would influence military effectiveness for generations, ensuring that Elena Martinez's greatest victory wasn't saving a single base, but changing the culture that determined how the military recognized and developed the tactical excellence necessary to protect those who served. In a profession where success is measured by the lives saved and missions accomplished, Elena Martinez had achieved the ultimate triumph, creating systems that would continue, saving lives and accomplishing critical missions long after her own remarkable career had ended. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.